Hi, everyone. We're going to let a couple people come in. And as we do that, we're going to continue.
Hey, bonjour.
Every week and have everybody introduce themselves while we're all streaming in, giving everyone a chance to get acclimated. I'll start. I'm Jen Curtis. I use pronouns she, her, and I'm calling in from Studio City. And I will be moderating and thinking about embroidering my native bee. And I will pass it on to Lee.
We can't hear you, Lee.
Can't hear me?
Now we can.
Oh, okay. I'm Lee Adams. I use she, her. I'm calling in from Altadena, and I turned in my embroidery yesterday, and I hope Jen got it. And I am calling on Cindy.
Hi, I'm Cindy. I'm calling in from West Covina, and I will not be embroidering tonight, but I will be I'll be facilitating this session tonight. Let's go with Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily, phoning in from Echo Park, Los Angeles. She, her pronouns, and I'm mostly just going to be listening and helping to read tonight. Yeah, looking forward to it. So let me pass it off to Ansu, who I remember from last week. Welcome back.
Hi, Emily. Hi, everyone. My name is Ansu, she, hers. I'm calling in from Palms, West LA. And I don't have embroidery, but I love to listen to this and participate. Thank you. I'm going to pass it to Caroline, who I remember from last time as well.
Yes, hello, good evening. My name is Caroline. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm calling from Studio City. And I will be, like Emily, reading a little bit and helping in whatever way is needed and listening. And I'll pass it to Tahere.
Hi. Hi, Caroline. Hello, everybody. I'm Tahere, she, her. I am checking in from Pasadena, California. I will be listening in and yeah, just enjoying what you're going to be reading. I don't have an embroidery right now. And I'll pass it on to Sylvia.
Hi, I'm Sylvia Holmes, she, her. I'm in Pasadena and I'm working on embroidery. I got mule fat.
Ooh.
I'll pass it on to Lee.
Beautiful.
I went already, so I am going to ask for Rochelle to pick this up.
Okay, hi, I'm Rochelle and I'm beaming in from Marina Del Rey, California. And tonight I'm going to be a reader, participant, observer. So I will not be embroidering, but happy to be here. And I'm going to pass it on to Lisa.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa. I'm zooming in from Vancouver. Good to see you. I haven't been able to participate for a while, but now I'm back. So good to see everybody. I am picking up my sad willow. I'm gonna get back to this thing. It's been months. It's been like crying and begging me to come back. So glad to be here. I'm not sure who has gone and who has not gone, but I'll just pass it on to anyone who hasn't gone. How about that?
I'll go. Hello, I'm Joan over in North Hollywood, Burbank adjacent. And my poor bee has been neglected for a while, but this is my bee.
Oh.
And I'll have to get back to, and I'm she, her. I'm going to call it she, her, but I can't really do it in the waning light. So I'll keep her nearby. And let's see, Scotty. Scotty, you haven't introduced yourself.
Yeah, no, I haven't. Hi, my name's Scotty. I've seen these events happening the last couple of weeks, and I've been meaning to join and and check it out. I use he, him pronouns. I don't have any embroidery, but I just want to listen and participate and see what's going on. Olan's not in the frame anymore. Maria, have you gone? You're on mute still.
Hold on. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, Maria. I'm Maria here in Los Angeles, and she, her are the pronouns. And I'm actually driving home now after having picked up some more thread for my project. And that's it. I'll be embroidering as soon as I pull in and park. And I don't know, I can't see anybody else because I'm driving. So please, whoever hasn't gone, please go.
I'll call on Martha.
Okay, then. I'm Martha. I'm dialing in from Talent, Oregon. We've just had our first good winter storm. Hi, Emily. Just, happy about the election returns. And Oregon, our state has just gone into kind of a shutdown over the COVID again. We're having high numbers. So we're back to really hunkering down for a while. So anyway, that's all. It's really good to be with you all again. My wild peony that I haven't worked on in ages. Eventually, it'll be
beautiful.
So at this time, I think most everybody that's going to join has joined. So I'm going to continue on. And if you haven't introduced yourself, there'll be another opportunity at the end of the reading so we can all get to know everyone. So let me start with the first thing. Welcome to the Fires of the West Learning and Native Plant Embroidery Zoom gathering, hosted by the Metabolic Studio. Since the 2016 presidential election, Lauren Bond and the Metabolic Studio have held potluck, protest, printmaking workshop, and community crafting space every Thursday to process collectively the various traumas of this time. With the advent of COVID-19 pandemic, however, we have shifted gears and created this Zoom space to educate ourselves on critical issues by reading and holding discussions while we craft. We spent the first 12 weeks of this Zoom gathering focused on text about prison and prison abolition. This current series is dedicated to educating ourselves about the fires of the West with a specific focus on Native land management and sovereignty, the history of fire suppression, and how we can decolonize our understanding of fire moving forward to create a safer and more resilient West. Many of you have already received the embroidery kits in the mail. In this kit is a line drawing on fabric of a botanical plant representing the food and medicine that Metabolic is currently growing on 2 studio sites along the LA River, up in Paihunadu, also so-called Owens Valley, where Los Angeles steals its water from, and in Vermont as an effort to give away free food to the folks in need right now. We drew the images of the plants we're growing, transferred the drawings onto fabric, which we sent to you, along with the embroidery hoop, needles, and thread. In the kit, you will have also received a self-addressed return envelope with postage. When you finish the embroidery, you can use it to mail it back to the Metabolic Studio. These embroideries will eventually be formed into a hybrid object. If you've not received an embroidery kit yet, and you would like to, please put your name in the chat now, and I will be in touch with you. You can also send an email with your name and mailing address to info@metabolicstudio.org, and I'll put that in as soon as I'm done reading. Tonight, we'll be listening to the NPR shortwave podcast, Managing Wildfire Through Cultural Burning, and then we'll read Sharon Levy's article, Rekindling Native Fires, published in Bioscience. We've decided to close entrance to the Zoom after the first 15 minutes of reading to create a better flow for discussion at the end. For anyone who would like to read text with us, please put your name in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself to let us know. We do have some studio team members that have already identified that they'll read, but we'd love to have anyone else who'd like to as well. So I will pass it over to you, Emily.
Okay, so we're going to start off. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, everybody, for being here. We're taking the reins for Maya and Ryan tonight, who are actually playing music during this time. So the first section of our reading tonight is actually a podcast experience. So I'm going to share my screen and play audio from my computer. And it's about 12 minutes of audio. So let me just begin that. Computer sound. Share. Here we go. And let us know in the chat bar if for some reason you can't hear the audio when I play it.
You're listening to Shortwave from NPR.
Hey, everybody. Emily Kwong here with NPR climate correspondent Lauren Sommer. Hey, Lauren.
Hey, Emily.
So in California, where you are, this week, the state set a record for the most acres burned in any fire season, more than 2 million acres so far. And in an average fire season in California, around 300,000 acres burn. So things are bad.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, I'm in the Bay Area, and when I woke up this morning, the sky is completely full of smoke because there's 3 huge fires burning all around this whole area. But, today I'm actually not here to talk about those kind of destructive fires. I'm here to talk about good fire.
Good fire. Okay.
This kind of fire, it actually has an incredibly long history and one that was erased for many decades. And I got to see it in the Sierra Nevada foothills.
Good morning.
There are around 60 people, gathered in this oak woodland, and this was back in February, and everyone was standing in a big circle.
So what we're doing out here is restoring life.
That's Ron Good. He's tribal chairman of the North Fork Mono. He brought this group together from tribes around Northern California for this 2-day ceremony to do what's known as cultural burning, basically setting low-grade fires on the landscape.
We don't put fire on the ground and not know how it's going to turn out. That's what makes it cultural burning, because we cultivate.
So cultural burning, these aren't like the big wildfires you see on the news at all.
No, these kind of fires, they're controlled and they're low to the ground. They basically clean up the overgrown brush that would be the fuel for those really big fires. Native American tribes burned hundreds of thousands of acres this way in cultural burns. They used to, at least.
Right. Used to before settler colonialism arrived and many tribes were forcibly removed from their land.
Exactly. Which is why this ceremony is really interesting, because Good invited people from the state and federal government. Those are the entities that largely banned cultural burning a century ago. But California has since realized there's no way to reduce the risk of extreme wildfires without using this good fire on the landscape, including cultural burns. So they're starting to work together. But first, Bill Leonard, who's tribal chairman of the Southern Sierra Miwok, needs to give a blessing.
Today on the show, how Native American tribes are trying to restore traditional burning on the lands where they once lived, and how these burns may help California get a handle on destructive wildfires in the future. You're listening to Shortwave, the daily science podcast from NPR. So, Lauren, you were telling us about how in February you were heading out with a group of tribes from Northern California conducting a cultural burn Very cool. But first, tell me how cultural burns are different from, say, controlled or prescribed burns, something I know the Forest Service does.
Yeah, the Forest Service and, other fire agencies, they set controlled fires too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's for the vegetation. They want to get rid of it so that there's not too much that builds up. Because overgrown vegetation can make fires more extreme.
Right.
Cultural burning, it does that too, but the tribes also do it to encourage certain plants to grow. Like, the first thing the team did that day was actually a harvest.
Oh.
Yeah, they headed out to some tall bushes. They're sour berries, which is also known as three-leaf sumac. And, this was late winter, so there were these long, spindly branches that were totally bare of leaves.
So, my mom is a basket weaver.
That's where I met Ray Gutierrez.
I'm Ray Gutierrez. Manahu, Nunanian Ray Gutierrez. Inim Wuxachimono. So I'm Wuxachimono.
He's clipping the longest, straightest branches, which are used in traditional basket weaving. And then after being harvested, the plant is burned to encourage more growth like that.
All of our basket material needs to be tended to in some way. So they need to be burned. And then next year, we'll probably have sticks that are 6-7 feet tall in 1 year.
Fire in the hole.
So does the fire burn the plant completely?
Yeah, like completely to the ground. And it really actually happens pretty fast. But the rootstock stays alive. So, after the spring rains come, the plant will resprout.
Got it. And the harvest can kind of happen again.
Yeah.
And I know some plants in California, they're kind of used to being burned regularly.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people forget this, but they're adapted to regular fires. I mean, historically, those are both naturally caused fires, by lightning, and then there were fires set by tribes. And, Ron says they burned like this for millennia, to encourage plant growth, also to shape the landscape, to attract certain game, for a lot of reasons.
When I was a kid, I learned from my mother, but my mother got in trouble when she burned because the fire department, didn't want her doing what we're doing today.
As you probably know, white settlers had a very different take on fire.
They came with their concepts of being afraid of fire. They didn't understand fire in the sense of the tool that it could be to create and what it did to help generate and rejuvenate the land.
And, let's not forget, there's a bigger history here. When white settlers arrived in California in the 1800s, there was an intentional and violent campaign to destroy their tribal culture.
Yeah.
I spoke to Beth Rose Middleton Manning about that. She's professor of Native American Studies at UC Davis, and she brought her students that day to be part of the ceremony.
There was actually a bounty on California Indian people. The governor had announced a war of extermination. So you have all that history, and it really fostered removal, settler ownership of indigenous lands.
So tribal burning basically stopped. And then fast forward a couple decades to the early 1900s, and that's when the federal government began an era of fire suppression.
Please be careful with fire.
That's the whole Smokey the Bear era, right?
Yeah.
Make sure your fire is dead out. Remember, only you can prevent forest fires.
Yeah, it's just interesting that the legacy of this idea that fire is always something that's bad and that has to be put out continued from settler colonialism onwards.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, up until the 1970s, the Forest Service had this rule they called the 10 a.m. rule. It was basically that all fires should be put out by 10 a.m. the next day. But all that suppression, it caused a lot of vegetation to build up in California. The forests became denser, and that set the stage for extreme destructive fires. So fire managers have realized, that has to change. And they started embracing prescribed burns. And now we're slowly being open to cultural burning, too.
So that brings us to today, where Western states are grappling with how to manage wildfire season. And you're going to talk about how cultural burns kind of fit into that.
Right. And so Ron and other tribal leaders have been trying to restore cultural burning for a while. And, not just teaching the concepts to people, but actually bringing people out to the land to practice it. And that's not easy to do when the land is no longer legally theirs, as Beth Rose described to me.
I think it's really important that we don't think about traditional burning as what information can we learn from Native people. about how they care for the land and then exclude people and move on with non-natives managing the land, but that Native people are at the forefront and are leading.
Okay, so this event is maybe a way to do that.
Yeah, which is why Ron invited, these government officials to participate and kind of get their hands dirty during this ceremony. Like Jennifer Montgomery, she directs California's Forest Management Task Force. So it's her job to figure out how to deal with all these overgrown forests. And, she was there helping light this fire in a big grassy field using a drip torch.
That was super empowering. I mean, I think every woman should get a chance to use a drip torch.
Is that like a flamethrower or something?
Not quite. It's basically like a watering can lighter thing that it basically spills out fire instead of water.
That's pretty cool still.
Yeah. I mean, by the time she was done, there was this kind of giant line of fire that kind of spread out pretty quickly across this entire field. But remember, this was February, winter, so the fire burned itself out pretty quickly, and then all that dried brush is just gone.
And it's an opportunity for me to really see how effective cultural fire can be in addressing the issues we have around uncontrolled wildfire. The work that we did today, if a fire comes through there, it will drop down to the ground, and frankly, it may, given the right circumstances, just stop the fire entirely on its own.
That is a big shift in thinking from the government's historical stance.
Yeah, and I mean, California has a goal to reduce the vegetation on 500,000 acres. And the federal government has the same goal for their land. So this is, 1 million acres total.
Wow.
And they're nowhere near that at this point.
Okay, so you've basically got the government, which has a lot of land and needs a lot of work to be done. And then tribes who have little access to their own ancestral lands and want to be doing more of this. And they're working in a kind of partnership.
Yeah, they're working on kind of forming it, at least at this point. I mean, a few other California tribes, the Yurok and the Karuk, they have agreements with the Forest Service to manage land with cultural fire. And some of that is public land. But there's still a long way to go. And in a lot of California counties, you actually need a special permit to do this because, air officials don't want a lot of smoke in the air on days when there's already concerns about air quality. So some counties have created a special tribal burn permit to make it easier for them, but, some haven't.
So going back to Ron Good, the tribal chairman, just given everything his tribe has been through, what is his outlook these days and looking into the future?
He told me, no matter what you're facing, all you can do is work on your own backyard. And his backyard goes across 4 counties, as he says. So that's what Ron has spent his life doing, is trying to spread this knowledge.
I can teach from the book, or I can teach in the classroom, I can show you videos, but hey, let me take you out on the land and let you do it. Let you really see and find out what it's all about, right? Oh, there's no better teaching than that.
And when he said that, it was the very end of the day, the sun was setting, and I caught up with him as he was looking out across, that field, which was totally black and burnt, and it was still kind of smoking a little bit.
I'm excited. I'm elated because I'm looking around at what we've done and what we've accomplished and how beautiful the land is looking, and it is. It is.
Not everyone would see that, I think, but that's what he's trying to change.
Lauren, thanks so much for taking us along with you to see this and experience this.
Thanks, Emily.
This episode was produced by Brent Bachman, fact-checked by Rebecca Ramirez, and edited by Viet Le. I'm Emily Kwong. Thanks for listening to Shortwave from NPR.
Okay.
Thank you, Emily.
Sure.
So now at this point, we'll start reading the article from Bioscience, and it's called Rekindling Native Fires, and it was written by Sharon Levy in April of 2005. I've put the article in the chat bar, but let me do it again if anybody wants to follow along. And Joan has volunteered to read, so we'll start with Joan if you're ready. Great. Okay.
Okay. Hi. Okay, Rekindling Native Fires. Just up the hill from the old Lyons homestead in what is now Redwood National Park stand a group of majestic tan oak trees, their broad bases hollowed and blackened by fire. Amelia Lyons tended these trees by burning out the undergrowth around them, and like generations of Hoopa women before her, she was rewarded with an abundant crop of acorns. Long after her death, the ground is littered with hundreds of small brown globes dropped by the trees. But without Amelia's fires, the acorns are riddled with weevil holes. Amelia survived the violent clashes between Northern California Indian people and the white settlers who arrived here during the gold rush of the 1850s. In 1866, she married Jonathan Lyons, the first man to start ranching in the Bald Hills, a series of sunlit prairies on a ridgeline that runs east from the coast and its dark stands of redwood forest. John McClelland, a fire management technician with the National Park Service, or NPS, stands in the tan oak shade. Traces of the fire traditions of Amelia and her people continue to emerge as he and his colleagues work to clear off the army of skinny Douglas fir trees that have invaded the Lyons homestead since Indian burning was banished. He points out hazel bushes growing at the edge of the tan oak stand, which Native women burn to induce growth of strong, straight new shoots for basket weaving. California Indians use baskets rather than pottery for cooking and collecting food. Amelia set fires to tend the hazel as well as tan oaks. Now there's not a single flexible young stick on the plant that a weaver could use. The meadow where the Lyons family settled had been created and maintained by Indian people wielding fire. Settlers who saw the Bald Hills in the early 1850s described, quote, prairies of rich grass, the finest tracts of country in California, where elk roamed the bands in hundreds or perhaps thousands, close quotes. Today, many nearby coastal meadows have been swallowed by forest. The balds where Amelia, Jonathan, and their sons ran sheep have shrunk but still exist because the family kept burning them as late as 1930 when the California Division of Forestry called a halt to intentional burning. Like the U.S. Forest Service, or USFS, and NPS, the agency began to do its aggressive best to stop any wildfire, natural or human-made. After decades of fire suppression, the NPS has come full circle. In 1992, Redwood National Park staff began setting prescribed fires in the Bald Hills with the aim of preserving the meadows that have been part of this landscape for centuries before white settlement. They'd like to burn all the balds once every 3 to 5 years. In good years, they've burned up to 2,000 acres of prairie and oak woodland. Some years, when firefighting crews are called away or weather conditions aren't right, they can't burn at all. In the aftermath of the flames has come an increase of native species diversity, a drop in fuel loads, and a reduction in the numbers of some invasive exotic plants. Through trial and error, and despite the obstacles of limited funding and a maze of bureaucratic requirements that must be negotiated before each burn, the park staff are trying to rediscover Indian land management. Quote, we try to mimic native burning, but we don't know precisely how often or when they burned, close quote, says McClelland. From records left by anthropologists who talked with Native people at the turn of the last century, and from interviews with living elders, researchers know some of the reasons Native people burned: to stimulate hazel growth, to control weevils that could infest the acorn crop, to keep the meadows open and bring new forage for game animals. The NPS is bringing flames back to a number of parks, including Yosemite, Sequoia, and Lassen, where a policy of fire use, letting lightning-sparked fires burn as long as they don't threaten developed areas, has been introduced. The National Fire Plan of 2000 recommended a number of actions to reduce fuel loads in western forests, including prescribed burns. But the fire plan made no mention of native burning. Computer models designed to analyze fire history and ecology still interpret only lightning strikes as, quote, natural, unquote, sources of ignition. Some researchers and many Native people argue that by ignoring the history of indigenous burning, land managers are missing out on ancient knowledge that can help show the way out of a very modern fire dilemma. Did someone else want to turn?
I'll take it over, Joan. Thank you. Hi, it's Rochelle from Metabolic Studio. Setting fires so good things grow. The US campaign of fire suppression has proven far too successful. Forests across the country are choked with thick undergrowth and downed logs. And fire-adapted trees like the California black oak and the ponderosa pine are being eclipsed by species like Douglas fir and grand fir that thrive in the deep shade of unburned forest. When blazes do start in these altered forests, they burn hotter and spread farther than they did in pre-settlement times. Even an army of firefighters backed by airdrops of fire retardant chemicals can't do much to stop these infernos. The scientific community has long debated the question of whether and how much Indian burning altered the American landscape. The maverick anthropologist Omer Stewart argued as early as 1952 that Indian people had shaped ecosystems throughout the continent with fire. By the 1960s, another maverick, the fire ecologist Harold Biswell, was proving that sequoia forests need flames, not protection from fire, to survive. But it took many years for these ideas to penetrate two entrenched dogmas, that wildfires are always a threat to nature and that human beings never influence their environments until they settle down and start to farm. For California Indians, the question of fire was a no-brainer. Our kind of people never used to plow, a Karuk woman told the ethnologist J.P. Harrington in 1929. All that they used to do was to burn the brush so that some good things will grow up. They do not set the fire for nothing, and it's for something that they set the fire. Kat Anderson, an ethnoecologist at the University of California, Davis, has been working with Native people from the Sierra Nevada since 1986. Elders say the most important reason for burning is to keep down the brush to prevent catastrophic fire, she reports. They're very concerned with protecting the big trees, and they know that in many places it's too dangerous to burn now unless the undergrowth is thinned out. Anderson has found a mass of documentary evidence to support claims of widespread native fires in pre-settlement California. There are numerous mentions of Indians setting landscape fires in the diaries of early settlers. Photos of 19th century California Indian women often show them as working on baskets using long straight shoots of beargrass, redbud, sourberry, or hazel. Contemporary native weavers say that these young branches must be collected in their first or second year of growth after a plant is burned. Museums hold some of the plant shoots Indian women collected in the years after the gold rush, straight and strong, still intact in tiny bundles, more than a century later. Based on baskets made by contemporary weavers, Anderson has estimated that a single Indian village in pre-settlement times would have used hundreds of thousands of straight branches to make baskets used for cooking, collecting acorns and grass seeds, and carrying babies. Walk into the woods of the Sierra Nevada today, and you will still find stands of basket plants like redbud and sourberry. In most places, the bushes have not burned for years, and their branches are gnarled and hardened, useless to a weaver. By the 1970s, weavers from the Yurok and Karuk tribes, who live along the Klamath River, not far from the Bald Hills, were having a difficult time finding usable plants in a landscape where every wildfire was suppressed. Keeping the basket weaving tradition alive had become a matter of cultural survival. Native women scoured the places where loggers had burned slash, searching for new sprouts of basket plants. Sometimes they took matters into their own hands and dropped a strategically placed match. When I lived up at the Klamath, a lot of times you'd hear the engine roaring out of Orleans to put out a forest fire, remembers Kathy McCovey, a Karuk tribal member and archaeologist for Six Rivers National Forest. My husband would say, "That's my grandma out burning." The little ladies would walk along, see a spot that looked right, and set a fire. It's a real pain in the butt to go through all the paperwork required for an approved prescribed fire. It's easier to drop a match, but now we have such a fuel load that the fires burn too hot. McCovey has been advocating for Indian basket weavers for years and has seen a real change in the attitude of forest managers. 20 years ago, most USFS officials were skeptical of any management strategy that was not directly aimed at increasing the timber cut. The agency has become much more supportive of lighting controlled burns to manage hazel and bear grass, and McCovey is now one of the organizers of an award-winning Forest Service program called Following the Smoke, in which volunteers help Karuk weavers to clear excess fuels from areas designated for burns and then learn about the basket weaving process. Still, few prescribed fires actually take place. The windows for burning are so limited, said McCovey. Often we can't go through with a planned fire because the fuel moistures are too low and the temperatures are too high. And when conditions are just right, we can't go ahead because the fire crews are away fighting wildfires. I'm just going to pop back up because there's a box here I think is important to read. Where there's smoke, there's germination. American Indian people planted their tobacco only in places that had recently burned. We now know that native tobacco seeds must be exposed to smoke or charred wood to trigger germination, says John Keeley, an ecologist with the US Geological Survey. Native people recognized that these fire-dependent plants required smoke. The scientific community did not begin to understand the ecological power of smoke until the late 1980s. Hans de Lang was then a graduate student at the University of Stellenbosch in South Africa, working to protect false heath, a threatened plant from a unique fire-adapted habitat called the fynbos on the west side of the southernmost tip of Africa. The false heath seeds stubbornly refused to germinate until Lang tried exposing them to smoke. Then at last, the plant sprouted in abundance. Several researchers were soon working to discover just what components of smoke awakened dormant seeds. In 1998, Keeley and C.J. Follington published an account of their experiment showing that nitrogen dioxide, NO2, can trigger germination in the seeds of several plants of the California chaparral. NO2, nitrous dioxide, is not the only chemical key in smoke that can unlock dormant seeds. Other researchers have triggered germination using liquid smoke from a grocery store, a concoction that contains no nitrogen oxides. Recently, a group headed by Kingsley Dixon of Kings Park and Botanic Garden in West Perth, Australia, isolated an organic molecule from smoke, butenolide, that can trigger germination at very low doses. Butenolide is the key agent responsible for the remarkable post-fire germination events that occur in nature, says Dixon. It germinates all known smoke-responsive species that we've been able to test. Butenolide germinates the seeds of many plants, including some, like lettuce, that have no association with fire. No one disputes that it is likely to become an important tool in horticulture, but Keeley questions whether it's really the substance that kickstarts fire-adapted plants in nature. Many California chaparral plants will sprout only in the first year following a fire. Seeds then go dormant and don't sprout until another blaze passes through. Yet Dixon and his colleagues have shown that butenolide can work at tiny doses, on the order of parts per trillion. Those levels of butenolide are likely to remain in soils for years after a fire, says Keeley. If butenolide is the key, how do those plants maintain dormancy? Dixon believes his new discovery will have important applications in restoration ecology, especially in habitats affected by a history of fire suppression. This is good news for land managers. It is now feasible for the first time to manage germination and recruitment of many rare and endangered species from fire-prone environments, he says. In wildlands at the edge of urban areas where smoke from prescribed burns can impact thousands of people, applying butanolide to the soil might prove to be an important alternative way of keeping smoke-dependent plant populations healthy. This idea has yet to be field tested since only small amounts of butanolide have been synthesized to date. Dixon believes it's a promising approach and that using synthesized butanolide will be an affordable option since only trace amounts are needed to stimulate the dormant seeds. And I hand it over to the next reader.
I'll take it on.
Thanks, Caroline.
Fire suppression backfires. Fire suppression is a very tough habit to break. Ecologists now understand that excluding fires from western forests has led to dangerous accumulation of fuel and is unhealthy for key fire-adapted tree species, including lodgepole, pine, and giant sequoia. Still, state and federal agencies continue to pour millions of dollars and work hours into fighting fires every summer. This past fire season, more than 8 million acres of wildland burned in the United States. Just in parentheses, this article is from 2005, so they are talking about 2004. And the numbers that I'm going to say are from 2003. So in 2003, the most recent years for which full statistics are available, federal agencies spent $1,326,138,000. I hope it was clear number. On fire suppression efforts, and close to 5 million acres burned. Many firefighting organizations still have the same marching orders they did 30 years ago. Put out every fire as fast as possible. Conflicts with endangered species protections, air quality regulations, and fear of liabilities STEMI plans to use controlled burns to reduce the fuel overload. Even some native people whose survival may depend on restoring fire can see a way to get off the suppression merry-go-round. In the remote Yukon Flats region of interior Alaska, fire suppression has made it increasingly difficult for native Gwich'in people to use their traditional means of subsistence, which is hunting for food and trapping for furs. Before the state government cracked down on the practice in the 1950s, the Gwich'in routinely burnt along creeks and wetlands to create fresh forage for moose, muskrats, and waterfowl. Now, says David Natcher, an anthropologist at the Memorial University of Newfoundland, who has worked with the Dandu Gwich'in, native people are caught in a conflict between their dependence on firefighting jobs, the only source of paid work in this part of Alaska, and their need for flames in the boreal forest. Natcher found that moose, one of the primary sources of food, are moving away from the Dandu Gwich'in community of Birch Creek in the aftermath of 50 years of fire suppression. The animals are moving east into areas that have burnt more often. Studies confirm that the Gwich'in belief that fire bring food for the moose. Studies confirm the Gwich'in belief that fires bring food for the moose. One ecologist estimate is that 1 year after a fire, this land produces about 200 kilograms per acre of browse, a level that declines with time between burns. Boreal forest stands that have not burnt for 25 years hold less than 10 kilo per acre of browse. Nature is working with native elders in the Yukon Flats, recording their memories of traditional burning patterns, a trove of knowledge that he believes must be preserved. Opening quote. These guys know the land, he says. They know if there's been a heavy frost, fires won't get out of control. They know if there's a mosaic of burnt patches on the ground, a new burn won't flare too hot and become a sweeping crown fire. Across the border, in the Canadian Yukon, some native groups who've regained control of their lands want to work toward burning again in the traditional way, planning prescribed burn based on indigenous knowledge rather than the standard of the US or Canadian Forest Service. Nature believes that a collaboration between native people and government agencies is the best way to move fire management forward. Prescribed burns designed to reduce the fuel load in local forests could keep fire crews busy for some times to come and increase forage for moose at the same time. Yet, many native people oppose a new let burn, in quotes, policy that would allow lightning fires to burn. They need firefighting jobs to make a living, even though they know a lack of fire is depleting local wildlife population. Opening quotes. It's a catch-22, explained Nature. Resources are in a state of decline due to fire suppression, but they can't afford to give up firefighting now when they have to travel farther and farther to harvest a moose. End quote. Emily, do you want to pick it up? Next section.
Oh. Yeah, let me find it here. Do I start at lessons from the Down Under? Yeah, okay. Oopsie, sorry. Okay, lessons from fires down under. At the close of a blazing hot day, late in northern Australia's long dry season, Cyrus and Lindsay Rostron touch burning branches to the grass. They're still young, 13 and 11 years old, but they're busy learning from their older brothers and uncles how to take care of their home country along the remote Cadell River in Arnhem Land, a vast stretch of Aboriginal land in the Northern Territory. Fire is their most basic tool. It's also outrageous fun. Cyrus and Lindsay dance among the slow-moving flames, while their older relatives look on with affectionate approval. The Aboriginal fire is the antithesis of a North American controlled burn. Instead of a flurry of paperwork and a troop of uniformed, gear-laden firefighters, there are 2 adults and 2 kids lighting the grass because they happen to be here and the place looks ready to burn. The flames creep along the ground, rarely reaching high enough to scorch the leaves of the eucalyptus trees. David Bowman, a fire ecologist at Charles Darwin University, stands grinning in the firelight. For several years now, he's studied the effects of indigenous fire in one of the last places on the planet where Native people have been able to continue their traditional ways of burning uninterrupted. Using modern tools like GPS, satellite imagery, and aerial photography, he's shown that areas managed by Aborigines are more biologically diverse and far more resistant to intense flames than nearby areas that have been uninhabited since the time of European colonization. One dramatic example is the fate of the fire-adapted cypress pine, which is dying off across much of its range. If cypress pines were people, says Bowman, we'd talk about an epidemic. If you go to nearby places where no Aboriginal people have been living for 50 years or so, you can fly along in a helicopter and count dead cypress pines. They're just scattered all over the landscape. The rostrins' home turf still harbors abundant, healthy cypress pines, evidence of the local people's skillful use of fire. Vast expanses of the Northern Territory suffer from problems similar to those in the United States. Thick vegetation grows up during the rain-drenched months of November through February, with the lapse of Aboriginal burning in most areas. Heavy accumulations of fuel build up. With the lapse of Aboriginal burning in most areas, heavy accumulations of fuel build up. When lightning storms strike late in the dry season, these places burn hot and flames spread much farther than they did when Aboriginal clans lived scattered across the landscape. Most Australian land managers believe the only answer to these increasingly intense blazes is to set controlled burns early in the dry season, reducing the fuel load before it becomes flammable as tinder. Bowman has found that the rostrins light most of their fires late in the dry season at what is considered the most dangerous time of year. Yet the flames stay relatively cool, clearing out undergrowth but sparing the trees. Because Aboriginal people burn often, maintaining a patchwork of charred areas that are cleared of fuel, their fires die out within a day, even in the scorching heat of October. Frequent burning is a far more powerful protection against intense, catastrophic blazes than the most high-tech modern firefighting equipment. Nature, independent of humans, created flammable ecosystems, says Bowman. Prehistoric humans tamed these natural fires. Modern people deny this historical and evolutionary reality. As a result, fire has become feral and a serious management problem. The Aboriginal people here, the Binjinj, face some problems that parallel those of the distant Gwich'in. The rostrins are among a small minority that have stayed on their traditional land rather than live in the overcrowded town of Maningrida, one of several Arnhem land settlements that have sprung up since the days of colonization. The Djelk Rangers, a group working to teach young people about the bush and encourage them to once again start managing their ancestral lands, is struggling to restore traditional burning to long abandoned areas. The federal agencies that supply the Djelk Rangers' shoestring budget strive to impose a white vision of fire management, advocating burns early in the dry season. This approach may be best in overgrown country with heavy fuel loads, but airdrops of incendiary devices in the early dry season threaten to distort the ancient pattern of fire in the few places where people like the rostrins have been able to maintain it. Bowman holds no illusions that the modern world can return to an indigenous style of land management, but he believes that knowledge of Aboriginal burning can provide crucial inspiration for managers grappling with the daunting problems of fire in today's wildlands. In the past, humans forged a sustainable relationship with fire, he says. Finding new ways to achieve that is the hard challenge we face now. Okay.
Thank you, Emily, and to all of our other readers. If you didn't get to read tonight, there will be next week. At this time, we will go over the community guidelines for the discussion. But before we go into that, I just want to mention that we generally do breakout rooms for 6 minutes, just 2 to 3 people in a room to start a discussion that we then bring to the whole group. So if you do not want to participate in that section, if you could just sign off now so I can start assigning people to the room, so that way we have the right amount of people to each room. And thank you for joining us.
Is it time for community guidelines?
It is.
Okay. Hi, guys. Number 1, we agree not to blame ourselves or others for the misinformation we have learned, but to accept responsibility for not repeating misinformation after we've learned otherwise. 2, we agree to listen respectfully to each other without interruptions. Only one person speaks at a time. 3, we acknowledge that we may be at different stages of learning on the content and discussion topics. 4, we agree that no one should be required or expected to speak for their whole race or gender. We can't, even if we wanted to. 5, we will hold each other's best interests at heart. We hope everyone has come to the table to learn, grow, and share. We will trust that people are doing the best they can. Let's challenge and encourage each other to do better. 6, share responsibility for including all voices in the discussion. If you have a tendency to dominate discussions, try taking a step back. If you tend to stay quiet, try challenging yourself to share ideas so others can learn from you. 7, silence is golden. Sometimes there will be long pauses. Sometimes silence can create space for folks who need that space to come forward. We agree to not fill silences out of discomfort. We will hold the silence with care and move forward intentionally. We welcome those of you whose minds are bursting with ideas to write them in the chat bar. 8, the facilitators are not experts. They're here to help facilitate the process. They and everyone in the group are here to learn. 9, it's okay not to know. Keep in mind that we're all still learning and are bound to make mistakes when approaching a complex task or exploring new ideas. Be open to changing your mind and make space for others to do so as well. 10, the facilitators are not moderators. They're not trained to moderate personal grievances. If discussion stops being about the reading and instead breaches into accusations and aggression, please respect the facilitator switching gears and refocusing on the text. If any of these guidelines are breached, Metabolic team member will reach out to you in a privately in a chat to provide a reminder. If the guidelines continue to be breached, they will provide a verbal call-in. By staying on this Zoom call, you're agreeing to these community guidelines for our discussion period.
Thank you, Rochelle. So at this time, I've created the breakout rooms, and I will send you all an invitation to join that breakout room. And then what I'll do is send 2-minute marks. So if you want to switch around in the group on who's discussing, and then at the end, I'll send a message to all saying, come on back. So enjoy your discussion. See you soon.
We were having a spirited discussion.
Well,
We
welcome
were too.
back. You can continue on here in a group dynamic, a bigger group.
I have to say the last thing Lauren said was, and the poet's name was Virgil. That's great. That was great.
Would anyone at this point like to share what they discussed in their breakout rooms, or it's open to discussion to the reading? Or if you didn't introduce yourself earlier, now would be a great time to do that as well.
I have a question. I think it's for Lee. It was suggested that you might know the answer in the breakout room that I was in. The question is are control burns or cultural burns, are they being adapted by the National Forest Service?
Yes, in some places. UC Davis has a department now called TEK, T-E-K, Traditional Ecological Knowledge. And I believe we will have a reading on that. And they are doing some excellent work. And what we're all advocating for is that Indigenous people be given those jobs, not train dominant culture people, but those are jobs that are for, yeah, you can feel it. It's the right thing.
It's the right thing to do.
Yes. And so, yes, that is coming back. It is being learned, but our no bureaucracy ever does anything to put itself out of business. And so CAL FIRE, bless their hearts for what they do for us, but at the same time, you will never find them planning a way to reduce their numbers and their infrastructure. And therefore, we have to advocate for that. That was a great question. Thank you.
One question that I had that I didn't necessarily understand from the reading is how the fuel load is measured. Does anybody know that?
So the fuel load is the biomass. It is the sum of the wood, the shrubs, a lot of invasive grasses, and each year that increases. So each year that goes by without a burn, that fuel load increases. And so we have 100, 150 year fuel loads in our unburned areas. And that's why we're having these extraordinary fires. In the past, mosaic fires by indigenous people reduced that biomass or fuel load regularly. And it kept the trees thinner, so there was enough water for all of them, enough nutrition for all of them, kept the grasses down, and fertilized everything with that process.
Thanks, Lee.
I'll go. I had a comment that I've been thinking about, because it definitely seemed like the Aboriginal cultures and the indigenous people of North America, when they did their cultural burns, it was very culturally contextualized. There was a purpose for it. It was associated with specific ecoregions, specific needs in that culture for interdependency with certain plants, the basket making and so forth. And it came out of a specific worldview and relationship to the land, in which they saw themselves on a certain continuum of the land and not as dominators of the land. And here we are, maybe 200 years later, nearly 200 years later. And the relationship now is a completely sort of extractionist, dominant model. And we're kind of trying to cherry pick and use the fire management as a sort of tool within this model. And I just wonder if there's something lost there, because we're sort of trying to siphon out just the utility of their knowledge of fire and use it within this sort of capitalist extractionist dominant model. And I just wondered if anybody else thought that, or if there were thoughts around that.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely resonates with me. Like what you're saying, it does feel that it is an extraction rather than embrace of the whole kind of concept of being interdependent with the land and being a part of the land ourselves, rather than saying somehow we're separate.
Up here in Canada, I've been hearing a lot about the land back movement, and I don't know if that's something y'all are tapping into there as well, but I think the idea is that it's not enough just to take these strategies, as you're saying, and like kind of choose what we want, that the stewardship of the land really needs to go back to the indigenous people. They need to physically get the land back that was stolen from them, but obviously that's not entirely possible in all cases. So it also means they need to be the people that are managing the stewardship and are being respected for their knowledge in kind of an ongoing way, and not just, stealing the knowledge the same way we stole the land already. So I think that's a really powerful movement, and it's a really youthful movement here in Canada, as well as respecting the elders, but there's a lot of young people involved. So that's where I get excited because that's the next wave. So yeah.
I think what comes up for me in that is Indigenous people don't see the land as separate from themselves. It's part of them. We are family. The rock people, the four-leggeds, the flying people, we are all family. And you care for the land, you care for the animals, you care for the plants, you care for the water as members of your family, because we're all one. And when we do that, when we embrace that, those extractive industries and even concepts are not what occurs. It's the embrace occurs. And I think that's the most powerful thing that we can learn and hopefully learn and embrace.
I agree with that point of view about the cultural narrative about personhood and what that means, and the self in relation to the rest of nature, I guess. But as well, like that translates into every sort of action or relationship that you have coming out of that cultural narrative. And we have a completely different narrative. We have a different way of being and seeing things. And even in the reading, it was really interesting because the Indigenous people knew that this specific plant would only regerminate with the effect of smoke. And then, centuries later in 1970, someone's like, why isn't this working? Why isn't this working? And then they sort of go back to the Indigenous people, oh, it's smoke. And then the immediate question is, oh, no, not thank you for illuminating us with that knowledge. But it's like, okay, which is the material chemical of smoke that is the critical ingredient? And that's our focus is on that, rather than, oh, this is this plant that we are in relationship to, that we use, that we need to steward, that we need to make sure can regenerate and keep on going. No, it's that doesn't matter. It's like, well, let me isolate the chemical isotope that works for this particular plant. And then how can I synthetically apply it to different applications? It's a different whole mindset for science. So that cultural context is so different now.
So I have a question. How can we reconnect? And I say we as a big we, not only us, but even children. And how can we reconnect to the spirit of the land? How can we bring, because that's a bit what is missing too, to our, like what you were saying, Ansu, our way of looking at what is not working, and let's look at this science thing, and but we don't see the big image. So how, maybe we don't have the stories that the native have about the land. We don't know. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we need more stories that would give us this connection to a spirit, I don't know.
Carolyn, you're absolutely right about that, because everything in our education system, everything in our pedagogy emphasizes this sort of materialistic, material focus, and denigrates what I think it was Lee that mentioned what they call traditional ecological knowledge, because we privilege what we can isolate and universalize in science. So we can isolate a particular substance, we can see how it applies universally, and we diminish quite arbitrarily knowledge that's specific to a place and embodied in a specific place, and knowledge that is orally passed down, knowledge that is not from the Western academic tradition, basically. So until we're conscious of how our whole educational system literally denigrates other forms and ways of knowing and privileges or like elevates this one way of knowing science that the Western sort of canon has brought, we're just going to always, you know, be stuck inside our little bubble, I guess. And I think it's really cool to even just open people's minds to saying, well, there's a whole other way to describe the stars in the sky, to describe fire. And the idea of seeing things differently and changing your framework and perspective is powerful. And it's a disservice to the younger generation, well, to anybody, but to the younger generation especially, to not make them aware that there are these other ways of seeing.
We need the storytellers back.
Well, that was one thing that I was looking up really quickly because I remember many years ago, the Library of Congress was doing Veterans History Project where they were doing recordings. And it may even be possible that they are also doing other recordings. My internet, for some reason, I think because I'm doing Zoom at the same time, it's running very slow. So I don't know if anyone else knows if they're doing anything else. I do know that they were trying to do oral history type projects. Be something to look into.
And I think also bringing a lot of the things that we've just been coming up in that conversation right now, the idea of getting gardening back into the schools, getting children out into nature so they begin to feel the wonder, and perhaps then introducing them to the ideas of the Aboriginal Native people, either worldwide or more local to start, and to have the children lead we lead the children out to nature and have the children, and as they grow older in the next generation, learn and take the knowledge. I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought, but I was just thinking the idea of the storytellers and the gardening, and I've worked with children in gardening. I think that's part of the way. We teach ourselves and we bring the children and they will discover and save the world.
Joan, I do work with LAUSD and school gardens, and you know, it's a massive system, and it's distributed all over. So I can't speak universally, but I do know that there is a consistent tendency to justify school garden programs in terms of science, technology, engineering, and math, which is exactly the opposite of what you were saying. But the fact is, though, that elementary school children and middle school children have an imaginative and instinctive and embodied reaction to understanding the miracle of photosynthesis, and we drum it out of them. We kind of make it about this kind of, what can you measure, and what can you, we deaden their kind of sensibility about that in a way. So yeah, I really appreciate what you said, that they need to play and like connect on a more visceral level, and they do it instinctually. It's just that there's so many impetuses going the other way.
I think one of the things I love most about sharing with children in the garden is about Western anthropologists seeing what are called primitive societies and writing about the poor people that have never been away from their home in the jungle and not even realizing that they don't need to go anywhere. They're growing their building materials, they're growing the materials for their clothing, their medicine is right there, their food is right there, their pets and education for their children is right there. And they have absolutely everything. They need nothing. But because they're not producing something to sell, the European colonists think there's something wrong with them. They're primitive. They are not primitive. Those people are advanced. And I love sharing that with kids so that they begin to think critically about what they're told and the dominant culture ideas. And the garden's a perfect place to do that. Yeah, we can open their minds and their hearts outside in the garden.
And Lee, what you said about the way that those quote primitive cultures are seen, it's never mentioned that their ecological knowledge and their understanding of ecological history is so sophisticated and so nuanced that centuries later they're finding out exactly what this was when they already knew it. Almost everything that they've known in the past is being quote rediscovered today by science. So it's really horrible the way they called it primitive. And I think a lot of the land colonization in the United States on this continent was done in the name of, as you said, this sort of capitalist idea of, oh, we are going to use the land efficiently because the natives were just not using the land properly. And that's just, yeah.
Or sometimes not efficiently, just taking all the natural resources out of it and ruining it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But the propaganda was that we're justifying our colonization because we can use it efficiently,
I put something in the chat of I think it's called the Eitel York Museum. Has anybody heard of it? They were doing a lecture about oral traditions and preserving oral traditions. So I'm not sure if there's anything that exactly pertains, but I listened to a lecture yesterday about crafts and there might be things there if you're interested in oral traditions of storytelling.
That's great, Roxanne. Thank you.
I wanted to mention that I follow the California governor on Instagram, and I follow the California Tribal Advisor, which I think is the state and tribal leadership, and that they have been meeting for the past 2 days. State and tribal leadership from across California have come together for the second annual California Tribal Nations Conference, and reflecting on government to government collaboration on land use, protecting cultural heritage, and so much more. So I've always noticed that the California governor, well, Newsom, has a sort of an open ear to this kind of cultural heritage protection. So I follow this California Tribal Advisor, and I think they're setting up a new cultural heritage center, or beginning to, in Sacramento. They've put aside the funds for it.
one of the downfalls in that program is that if your group is not recognized, then you're not included. And one of the things that the colonizers did was there are still indigenous people in every port in the state of California, but there is the Chumash are the only recognized group along the coast of California, because ports are valuable, and if they were ever had to give back, dominant culture would lose. And I've been to Washington on behalf of the Gabrielenos, and while they searched the stacks and records for whether this group could be certified or not, as a former librarian, I meandered through the library and looked at the maps. And when the librarian came back out of the stack, she says, "I'm not finding a lot." And I said, "Let me show you something." And I pulled out the map of California, and there's Humboldt, beautiful bay, no indigenous people. San Francisco, no indigenous people. San Diego, Los Angeles, no indigenous people. Ventura, Chumash. And that was because they had possessions, and the Europeans identified possessions as a good thing. So they decided those were smart Indians and ones that we can recognize. And the others were enslaved and destroyed and literally had to hide out. And they're still here, but they're not recognized and they get no benefits. So it's a very contentious thing that is very hard. I have an adopted Gabrieleno daughter, so I deal with this on a regular basis, and it's very painful.
Lee, I'm really sorry to hear that about the fact that there was a division. It sounds like there was a division when are you saying that if tribes had no possessions, do you mean like houses and property? What do you mean by that? They weren't recognized. Could you explain more about that?
Yeah, the more significant thing is that if their territory included a great port, then the Spanish
a great what?
Port, the port of Los Angeles, the port of San Diego. The number one thing was location, the real estate, location. But secondly, personal belongings. Indigenous people work as a family and they share everything. So our local people here were traders that traded up and down the coast and had annual gatherings called Mumpetum, the gathering of the ocean people. And the Chumash happened to have been very much into dress, feathers, headdresses, and that was seen as personal property. And that's something that the Europeans identified with, whereas our local people right here in the Los Angeles area were referred to as digger Indians because they would bring roots out of the ground to eat. So in recognition, there is county recognition, there is state recognition, and the county doesn't recognize the Gabrielino, and yet there's a Gabrielino on the county seal. The center of the county seal of Los Angeles is a Gabrielino woman.
Wow.
They are recognized by the state, but it's on again, off again, and they are not recognized federally. And that means no benefits, no, yeah. It's really challenging.
Does that have anything to do with how some Indian tribes have gotten land back and they have it and others haven't?
Yes, absolutely. The Gabrielians have received nothing.
Oh. Oh, wow. It's a deep story. Very deep. Wow.
A deep hurt still going on. Yeah.
It's a lot of people were disenfranchised.
They had to hide. They had to pretend they were Mexican in order to avoid being dominated. And it hasn't really changed. We now look to Indigenous people, like Ansu said, we ask for their information, and then how can we monetize that? Can we make that chemical and sell it? Can we, yes, firefighting. Let's get our dominant culture firefighters to learn this and use it rather than hiring the Indigenous people.
Right, right.
Live and love in that area. Yeah.
I got it. I got it.
Wow. I just want to add to that, Maria, that you said that a lot of people were disenfranchised. It was a lot more than disenfranchisement. It was genocide.
Genocide, yeah. No, I know.
Yeah.
My own people are from the Middle East, Greeks from Turkey, and you know about the Armenian genocide, and that's what's going on right now again, as you know, in Armenia, and as I can't say that between the Armenians and the Azerbaijan, I can't say it. So these are stories that continue to circulate and go around and around.
I've just dropped a couple of references in the chat in case people are interested. Oh yeah, I
Wow.
I don't have to say, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
But Lee, it did make me look around. I mean, it's an ordeal to go through, but it did make me look at everything I see around me in this different light. And then further, it made me look at this whole sort of cultural hit story that's been broadcast around the world about this place. And it's like, wow, what propaganda. This is the most masterful propaganda I've ever, you can imagine.
You're muted, Lee.
Sorry. So many of our most famous, what we consider Native American actors, Michael and Sarah, but that all you have to do is hear the name, and he's not Native American. but we just keep taking from the culture. We use them for sports mascots, and that's criminal. It's just criminal. We have the Bulldogs and we have the Braves. How is that acceptable? It really isn't. And finally that is changing, but we can't
talk about it. There is so much, and it's so deep. It is really so deep. Do we know what's happening next week?
Let me see if I can find the.
I have a list somewhere.
I
I'll
know.
get it.
I can tell you what it is. Hi, everybody. It's Lauren. Nice to see you all. Next week, we're going to be reading a first person narrative written by early colonizers when they came into the Americas, which is one of Maya's favorites. And that's why she asked that we switch what would have been this week with next week. So what she really likes about it is that it's incredibly descriptive writing about what the Americas look like, the West look like, written by the colonizing force. And it's kind of sad that it was written by colonizing forces about what was there before they got there. But I think it may give us a real empathetic feeling for what's been lost. And yeah. Oh, I did something.
Here, I'll see what I can do.
Well, it seems like we might be wrapping up on this fabulous discussion. I just wanted to ask Maria, what color floss you ended up getting and what you're working on. Oh, I can't, I think it's because of the background. I might be able to pin it. Hold on. And we can't hear you.
This is a Matilda poppy. Let's see, can you see it?
It's coming in and coming out.
Sorry.
But we can see, I can sort of see the orange. It's beautiful. Is that?
Thank you. So I had to go get some more white white thread, because the thread that came with the kit was kind of a tan color, and the fabric is tan. And so the flower needed, in order for the flower to stand out, I needed some white thread. So I had to go get some more.
It's beautiful. What did this?
That was probably my fault.
Oh, whatever. It's okay. Lee, I think you did one of these too, right? Yeah. And I was trying to figure out how you did your stitches. I mean, that's a big white area, and I didn't get a good enough look at the way you did your stitches. So I'm just kind of winging it.
It's beautiful. I did it with chain stitches because it was such a large area to fill.
Right,
But
exactly. Yeah.
that's gorgeous.
Well, thank you.
One of the things that I'm doing, because I have a white flower too, what I did was I outlined in like a blue, and then I'm filling it in with a white. So it gives kind of a shading and a texture to it. So that's one solution that you can do as well.
Yeah, yeah. Let me see. Oh, yeah. Right. Got it. Okay.
Up in the wings over here, I've done like silver, I've done gray, I've done white, like just a bunch of texturing for the bee wings.
It's beautiful. I love it. It's
It
so
is beautiful.
lively.
Thank you. It's been, I mean, it's been amazing to be able to make something with my hands, and very calming.
It is calming.
Stress reliever. When the news gets on the TV, I just start, I mean, I think this whole bee was during one of the debates.
Woo!
I had done a Matilda poppy too earlier, and I guess it was a different image. And it was when it was on, of course, I can just hold up my phone to this. It was against that beautiful heavy linen, and oh, I don't think it's going to show. Well, I just did. I got a couple of different.
Wow, it's
different
beautiful.
That's
whites.
great.
Thank you. And this actually had a couple of Manila poppies on it, and I pretended that I was just painting with thread. And you can't see in this picture, but there are different colors of tans. In there.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a lot of fun. And thank you and good night, everybody. See you all
Thank
next
you.
week.
Good night,
Thank you.
Joan.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Sleep tight.
You all too.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
See you next time.
Good night.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Nice to
Bye.
see you. Nice to see everybody.
Bye. Happy Friday. It's the Friday the 13th of the goddess. Enjoy. It is.
I should be scared now.
No, be happy. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Fun. Bye.
We did it.